Thank you for your time. Welcome to Shooting from the Hip. We've been on hiatus for the summer. How was your summer?
Oh, it was great. Very warm, very summery. How was yours?
Same. Although in Canada, it can quickly go from a summer's day to a fall's day. No warning, or very little anyway. So we just want to start the new season with hello and thank you for showing up. I'd like to read something to you. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we're doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We're just here to be entertaining. We are not experts of any kind. We're just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. So today's episode, we're going to be covering leadership, politics, transparency, and democracy. But we're not going to, this is not a commentary on the current state of affairs of politics. It's more a reflection on politics, leadership, transparency, and democracy, and what these ideas are. So I'm just going to start by jumping in, and we'll start with leadership. And leadership, depending on which dictionary you use, is defined as the ability of an individual or a group of people to influence and guide followers or members of an organization, society, or team. Leadership is often an attribute tied to a person's title, seniority, or rank in their hierarchy. So the traits of what are considered high quality traits in a leader would be strategic thinking, delegation of authority and responsibility, communication, integrity, empathy, flexibility, and enthusiasm, general enthusiasm for what they're doing. So, anything you'd like to contribute to that, or anything you'd like to add, Slim, to that, or?
I just want to point out those are a lot of character descriptions. It's not like you're looking for a superhero or anything. It's just somebody who can maintain balance. They're not tyrannical. They're also not a pushover.
Right. So that's an excellent point. So the idea is that it's not something idealized. It's qualities and traits that actually you can draw out of yourself, or you can refine in virtually anyone. Right. So the ability to be a leader is not necessarily for somebody who's uniquely qualified. Most people carry the capacity to do everything that I just cited. You just need to develop those capacities so that then you can act in that role, right? So potentially everybody could be a leader, and I'm a real proponent, and I find it a very endearing idea that you can elevate people to that status. So my question is then, just to make things a little more interesting, why are we not educating people to exemplify those very qualities? I mean, do you think you would have been better served in your course of your education if that would have been somehow a focal point?
Yeah, I think so. Like the idea that not only are you going to be a student, you're going to be a team lead someday, and that's the way you have to take your studies. Because especially in earlier life, being a student, you just feel like, oh, this is a jail I'm in for.
And you're spinning your wheels, just doing as you're told.
Yeah, and you do that from the time you're a child until you're a teenager.
Right.
And then you're kicked out in the world, and they're like, "Go be a leader." It's like, well, excuse me.
Yeah, without any qualifications, or without having prepared you for those roles. So I think.
But that's great if you're going to continue your education, or if you're not going to be a leader, because maybe there's some idea that there could be too many leaders.
Well, that could be problematic. But my thinking is that I think we might be better served if you had people who were strategic thinkers and understood the value in delegating responsibility and knowing how to communicate and how to have integrity and empathy and are flexible and enthusiastic in what they do. These things, I don't think that they become problematic if everybody suddenly starts demonstrating these capacities. So this is the argument that I make, that I go, that maybe you're better served by having everybody prepared for the leadership role, because at some point in the course of their life they may be called on to do just that very role. And aren't you, outside of that role, aren't you better served by the capacity to be like, to have okay, so strategic thinking you can refer to as sort of as critical thinking or objective thinking as well, right? That it's just a way to look at things that are occurring, and then to be able to find a method of addressing what you're being confronted with, right? And that takes like a strategic mind, right? So everybody can develop that capacity, and it serves for, never mind for the leadership role, but what it does in terms of development of the individual. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a past episode, and I think that there's real value in fostering the best in what people are capable of. So if these traits of quality leadership, they could be the hallmark of virtually everybody, and I don't think it would create conflict. I think people would be more understanding and more willing to understand each other. Isn't that our problem right now? Aren't we all like so divided? Everything that happens is super divisive. Thanks, COVID, you bastard. Like, all it did was serve to further divide us. So I don't see it as a deficit, and I can't imagine. Now again, it's just my opinion, but I don't, like I said, I don't see it as being something problematic if everybody exemplified that. And remember, it being varying degrees, but at least then that would again contribute to not just quality leadership, but a quality individual.
Okay. Yeah, it's in a balance. It's the balance of the qualities, because you can have somebody who's very discerning, and that's great. But if you pit them against someone else who's discerning, like,
but who also has other capacities, that, like, they have integrity or empathy and flexibility, then to your example, then those two people, even though one only is really just the strategic thinking is a strong suit for them, but everything else is kind of at a deficit. Then that other person who hits most of those marks, or a couple of the marks, would represent a higher efficiency or higher competency.
Yeah,
Right?
I was gonna point out the one person who's very discerning would say, like, they're very good logically, but it's within the parameters of what they were taught.
Right.
They're not gonna be able to get broad horizons like the other person. The other person's gonna think even more laterally, like, this, and this suggest this, but that's only true if those first.
What deductive reasoning,
Right.
Right? So again, that's drawing conclusions based on the available evidence. But that's what strategic thinking is. You sit there and you're confronted with circumstances and the details of those circumstances, and then at some point you have to take a leap of faith and start connecting dots in terms of like how you're going to address whatever the circumstance is, right? So all you're really doing, all life is just you dealing with the shit that's in front of you, right in front of you, right? Okay, so anything else you'd like to add?
I would say fundamentally, someone's purely logical and they're good at it, like deductive reasoning, all of that. They still might be caught up in dogma because it's like the
Sure.
faith they have.
Right. So then you're referring to basically subjectivity. So
Yeah.
everything then, no matter how much they apply these capacities, or how effective they are at applying them, if they're filtering through their self-interest or their preferences or their biases, then it colors the outcome.
Right, like someone with self-integrity, all these other characteristics that would lead to being a leader, they would at least be able to say, wait a minute, everything that I was using to find this solution, it's kind of misrepresented in my own head, and I discovered it through the application of these thoughts. And then they would have to go like, "Sorry guys, I screwed up. I'm being a good leader. I'm admitting we have a better
Yeah,
leader."
I think again, I think it's another quality that maybe is not on the list here, but that would be worth noting: recognizing your own limitations or where you failed.
I would put that in integrity because like it takes
Yeah,
integrity.
you're again 100% agree with you, right? So, I think what we're going to do is we're going to move on to leadership, though, but like in terms of how business models approach the concept of leadership. And don't worry, folks, we're moving on to politics. So the primary leadership styles in business, there's the autocratic, right? And so even though this is defined as something that like within the context of like corporate thinking and business function, the reality is that what you're going to find is this is also applicable like in the way our society is organized and how it and the different forms of leadership that excuse me that you find within society. So autocratic is the first one, and it's a leadership style or a management style wherein one person controls all the decisions and takes very little input from the groups or members. So they're basically authoritarians, right? So their word is absolute. You don't question their authority, and then you can see that how that applies in the business world, but you can see that in the real world too, right? The tons of like, tin-plated dictators in the world and people who even within the context of politics thinks that their say is absolute and final, right? And when there's typically, especially within democracy or the form of democracy that we experience here in Canada and the US, representative democracy. So if the representative is like basically pond scum or the stuff you'd scrape off the bottom of your boot, then that's the kind of leadership. Yeah. Anything you'd like to say?
Oh, I was just thinking, I kind of see that everywhere. Like we say we have democracy, but it's kind of like we have the best that we can do.
The best that we're capable of producing.
Yeah.
Well, so then it would be fair to say then this autocratic style of or authoritarian form of leadership is kind of prevalent, and you may find it to be more typical than not.
Yeah, I think authoritarian is a really good way to describe it because essentially it's a bunch of people saying
it's a single person dictating to a bunch of people. That's what authoritarianism is, or this autocratic approach to leadership.
Well, I was just gonna say like it seems like people are using their authority saying like, look, we got voted in by all these people. That's proof, proof by election that I'm doing the right thing. And it's like there's so much more of that.
Oh, I agree. Well, just because it'll be interesting when we get into politics, like particularly in terms of like leadership and stuff. So again, I don't want to start jumping into this too soon, but you can see we're in an autocratic or authoritarian form of leadership. It can lead to forms of abuse, right? Abuse of the position and the authority that they've been vested in. So, and again, our history's replete with it. You don't have to go into the deep dark past. Just in recent times, you can see it, and it's across the board. It's endemic. It's it's an epidemic across most of the political bodies running virtually every country on the planet, right? So. The other form of leadership is a democratic one, which is the one that we're kind of commenting on. We're just skirting, and democracy translates as like mob rules or run by the people, right? And it's making room for multiple people to participate in the decision-making process. Democratic leadership is commonly referred to as a participative leadership, which I mean, I guess to a degree it is, right? But they exercise their influence like heavily, right? Even in representative democracies, right? Which is what we experience in terms of the way we organize and the leadership of our countries, right? So So, and then another form is laissez-faire, um, form of leadership, and these leaders allow for their followers to have autonomy to make their own decisions and to manage their own challenges, provide support, guidance, consultation, and training when required. They are entrusted to handle the details uh, and the execution of tasks. Right. So I I really like the idea of laissez-faire, where like even though there's somebody who's maybe the final decision maker, they don't they don't micromanage. They don't get involved with every little uh, every little thing with regards to how things should run. They trust in the people in their cabinet that's to support them to be able to do it, and that the average person will act in a capacity that's like that best serves like the country or the leadership style, right? So you're familiar with the laissez-faire?
I haven't heard it like described exactly that way. I haven't heard of the word laissez-faire, but I at least can see like, oh yeah, that's how like local government almost works.
Right.
Like there's a sense of, oh, we're trusting them to do their job. I'm not saying they're not.
And then there, excuse me, and then there's transformational leadership, defined as leadership or approach that causes change in individuals and social systems. Ideally, it creates value and positive change in the followers, with the end goal of developing followers into leaders. So that's my favorite kind of leadership. Is this transformational leadership, where now within the leadership, what they're looking to do is then to foster quality leaders within the general membership. So I guess that would be, you could say, their particular political ideology or body, but really like the population at large, right? So that you foster all those things that you would like to see in a leader. You suddenly have now everybody exemplifying it. So I think, to me, that's the one that makes the most sense. But then the reality is like, how realistic is that? Or is that purely like pure ideology, right? Like or idealistic, right? You got anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm not sure where the line between idealistic and like practical. I'm not sure where it would sit, but there's different forms of schooling out there that do show like at least individuality could be found, like at an early age.
Yeah, I agree with you. I did that, and I think you hit the nail right on the head at early age. That you introduce it. You don't wait for people to get into post-secondary education. You introduce it to them like, like when they're in grade 5, right? Like grade 4 or something like that. We're going to foster you because we need people who are going to be responsible and accountable for anything, any kind of function they're going to participate in. All right, so I think that kind of, in terms of defining leadership, I think that kind of like it encapsulates that all right. I'm sure that you could go on endlessly about it, but again, we're trying to present an entire idea, so the idea crosses a bunch of different ideas that are related. So we're going to move on to politics, and so it's an ancient Greek word, politika, and all it means is affairs of the cities. Is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relationships among individuals, such as a distribution of resources or some kind of status, right? So the branch of social science that studies politics and governments is referred to as political science, right? So again, it's an idea that it's fluid, like it's got wiggle room for you to explore the idea and maybe find another way to interpret what politics are, right? Now the version that the version that we currently experience here in Canada and the U.S. Sometimes it's just a comedy show.
Yeah.
Right? Like it goes from the sublime right to the absolute ridiculous. Like that's the range in the way that politics presents, but I don't think it's exclusive to North America, but at least with North America, it comes with a ton of fanfare, right? But it's true across the board, right? So, um, and within the context of politics, um, they break it down. Not typically when people think of politics, they think of like a liberal kind of way of thinking, ideology versus a conservative ideology. But the real division within politics is between a moral kind of approach to politics, and then the reality or the realism of what politics is like. And some perspective on politics view it empirically as an exercise of power, right? While others see it as a social function. And I think the argument could be made that it's both, but again, in recent times, we've seen how they use how quickly they turn their political authority into an exercise of power, whereas again, as a social function, it's how you meet the needs of the general membership, like all the individuals that make up your society. And now it's funny to me. I don't know. It's funny, like funny, strange that how divided we are by like our subjective personal interests. How much that feeds into how much division that we have or that we experience, quite regularly. So, I mean, it's the kind of thing that where you sit there and it makes you wonder what they're doing or what they're thinking when they make some of the decisions that they make, right? So, anything you'd like to say?
I could see I could see how political affairs could get really mixed up when it comes to like, oh, I imagine this will work. I believe this will work.
So
And
maybe it's fair to say it's messy.
it doesn't help that they're getting money from lobbyists all the time. Like it's not uncommon.
Okay, so again, another interesting point, which we're gonna address that um, when we get to transparency. So I don't want to get there just yet.
Yeah.
So, but
Before we get on that, can I mention like it seems like government or political affairs are best when they require little money and they're doing the least amount of change they can just to make sure things go well instead of like broad sweeps where they're saying, "Oh, we can help all these people, let's do this." And then you find out, "Oh, well, there's motivation by money, there's motivation by political power,
right,
lobbying."
right. There's a lot of
Yeah.
factors that suddenly uh, that enter into the process, and here's the thing: the distinction that we make between political moralism and political realism, it oftentimes politicians will justify actions by saying like it's the reality of the situation that it supersedes whatever would be morally acceptable,
Yeah.
right? Because they have to make some kind of a decision, and sometimes it's not always moral. It tends to reflect the reflects what's going on in whatever event that they're having to, a crisis or any kind of thing that might be going on politically that they have to address, right? That will typically affect the general membership. I hope that wasn't confusing.
I feel like it's a little confusing, but at the same time, like it makes
But
sense.
it's the idea, it's the morality of politics versus the reality of politics.
Yeah.
So sometimes they end up having to make decisions that reflect like what's really going on in the world. So like a good example would be going to war. Morally, it's apprehensible, but the political reality is that sometimes it it's the only solution that you have. I'm not justifying any kind of political action by any government or that condoned open warfare or the use of violence. Okay, I'm just saying that's how you make the distinction between the moral, political moralism and political realism. That's where you would see it play out most, right? Because you'd have pundits on one side saying, "Oh, that's you can't be doing that. That's like morally unacceptable." And then other political pundits would be going, "Well, it's the only decision we had left. There was no other choice," right? So again, you can quickly see where political realism could be a convenient way to excuse a particular course of action.
Yeah, if political realism is used in a situation where there really is no other choice, it makes sense. There's, mass amounts of damage. You're gonna have to raise tax to help those people in that area.
Oh yeah,
Something
right.
like that
Yeah,
would
or
make sense.
catastrophe. Yeah, addressing catastrophes. It doesn't have to be an act of open war. That would be politically, morally acceptable. That what you need to do is like here you can't leave these people out in the streets. You have to help them. You have to do everything humanly possible to assist and make things right, regardless of like it's just an act of God if you choose to characterize it as that. But you have like nature unleash on populations, and in the aftermath of that, this is why they're supposed to exist. So that morally, that's great, and it overlaps with the political realism that like here the reality of the situation is that that all these people are suffering and you need to do something to ameliorate the suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable when there's a moral stance to be taken, but there's no actual, real political decisions being made. It's more like, I have to find a way to rephrase it. Like,
It's okay.
there's something that actually happened, and it's your moral duty to go help,
Right.
but it'll be misrepresented, and then they'll say, okay, well, you need to give money to this person who will help those people. You can't directly help those people. Like there's wishy-washy things that can come up.
Nobody would fault you if you'd go like it's kind of messy, like, and I don't, and I think the history of politics, that we don't have to do all 5,000 years of human history, just the last 500, and as a descriptor, it would be fair to say that it's kind of all been messy, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, and again, part of that I think is because it's human failings, and we're fallible. We make mistakes. We do stupid shit. We sometimes act out of self-interest when you should have been maybe not acting out of self-interest. You should have been approaching things objectively. But again, part of the way it functions, it can only function as well as the individuals who are within it, right? And so if they lack all those leadership qualities that we spoke of, or they have deficits in some of those different characteristics, it's going to lead to maybe poor decision making, right? So again, it speaks to the value then of really drawing out all those capacities, not just in a political class, but in each and every person.
Yeah, because there's going to be people that genuinely want to help, and they won't want to make the situation seem like something else just so they get more support.
Right.
They're going to say, listen, I know this doesn't seem like a big thing to you guys, but to me, I see this, this, and this lining up to become a big issue. We have to work on it now.
Well, again, I wish there was an easy solution here, because this is the appeal for people who want the world to be black and white. They want, because if it's black and white, the solution's easy, it's straightforward, but it doesn't reflect any nuance, right? Like human failings, like things that are beyond your control that'll occur, like across the planet, that may have an effect politically, or how countries are going to conduct themselves. So, I mean, that's why I always argue that it's perhaps maybe all gray, right? And if you're leaning into the black or you're leaning into the white, you're out of balance. You're approaching extremism, which again, not very beneficial, right? It usually ends up being very costly and not in a good way. So I think again the idea the idea of politics, you can't demand that the leaders be better leaders. They're who they are. They are what they are, right? And I don't. I'm not going to go any further. We're going to jump into that when we get to transparency more, because I have a lot to say in terms of the way the political class functions. But what I would like to do is we're gonna talk about political realists. We're gonna move into that because Niccolo Machiavelli, who's a interesting figure from about 500 years ago, who really he wrote a bunch of treatises that basically influenced the way political power could be viewed. So outside of like moral or ethical political standing versus a real, the reality of politics. Well, the reality of politics, as he saw it, as Niccolo Machiavelli saw it, is politics is based on the use of power, and irrespective of the ends being pursued. So then the ends justify the means, and in the pursuit, so politics, as he saw it, was the pursuit of power, which is kind of a scary idea, to think that there's a political class that's motivated by the idea that what they want is political power. And for those in the political class who come from independently wealthy families or are independently wealthy of their own, once you have the capacity to basically afford anything material, what's the next step, or what's the next thing to acquire? And perhaps that, in this case, it's power, right? Which is kind of frightening. I'm going to the idea that there's people out there motivated by acquiring as much power as they possibly can. Not cool. Any thoughts you'd like to share, or any ideas you have?
Once you have I feel like at any point, if you have money, you want to keep money. It's these people who are in power, let's say, they want to feel comfortable that they're not going to lose it. And the best way to do it, in their mind, because I'm assuming they have this I need it all mentality.
Right.
They just keep consuming more and more ways to stay economically on top, to seem socially like they're benevolent people. It's this whole grab for, I want to be the good person who has all the money, who's going to do nothing but good. But someone who sells you that, it's like, that's bullshit.
I think you very quickly end up in a field of lies when the pursuit of power is what's driving the people in politics, the entire political class. So it's it's conflict versus cooperation, and to me, at least in terms of an idea, cooperating with one another means that you help each other to elevate one another. You lift each other up. Whereas conflict, you're using that to divide everyone so that you can grab what you require for you. Right. So again, it makes for very dangerous political class. Right. And again, history will bear this out. You can see that. It doesn't matter what country you go to, abuses of authority by people whose only interest in getting into leadership was power. Right. So again, I don't want to comment on any one politician particularly, but just in the broadest sense, you can see that, right? So it's, to me, again, more scary, right? Right? And you just go oh man, what a bunch of bastards. Sorry, right? So There's this Irish political scientist, Michael Laver, and he noted politics is about the characteristic blend of conflict and cooperation. So that's how he saw it, that they weren't separate things. That the way you're doing is it's push and pull, and you have to figure out, right, like the balance between the two. And that can be found so often in human interactions, right? Pure conflict, war, right? Pure cooperation, is that like true love? I don't know, is love something even political people even use as a reference to what they're capable of doing? But politics then would be a mixture of the two, conflict and cooperation. And I think there's truth in that statement. I think that you see it, that no, even dictators, that somehow they'll act in a very giving capacity as much as a domineering one, right? And again, it's in varying degrees, right? But where it's this push and pull between conflict and cooperation, and it's fair to say that that's probably representative of like even our interactions, like between two people, or so it's not just political, like it goes right down to the individual. Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to mention, if you read The Prince by Machiavelli, it's really strange the way he describes these political scenarios, because they're back in like
500 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was the 1400s to the 1500s.
Right. It was a drastically different time.
Radically different.
But
there was all of Europe was basically, they were all trying empires. All the northern European countries created empires vying for control in the world, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because throughout the book he'll give you different options that you can look at and be like, this is what happens if you're more peaceful in this scenario. For example, for guards, you hire them. Well, guess what? You have guards that will hire you and they'll protect you and they're loyal. But as soon as someone has more money, they'll wait till you turn your back and kill you. So like, there's scenarios where he's saying like, you need to be the most brutal person ever in order to survive these scenarios. And then the very next page is like, oh, you gotta be a sweetheart. It's like, it's very disturbing to see this Machiavellian character.
Okay, so then for him, it's flip-flopping from the extreme of being the cooperative and conflict, and there's no middle ground. There's no like gray area between the two. You're either being one or you're being the other, right? And his view, his full name was Niccolo di Bernardo de Machiavelli, and he lived from 1469 to 1527. He was an Italian diplomat, author, philosopher, and historian who lived during the Renaissance. So what an interesting, so again, one of my favorite periods in history. And it was a time of ideas, so no wonder he started developing these very, I guess it would be fair to characterize them as extremist ideas, right? He's best known for his political treaty, The Prince, which you mentioned, which was written in like 1513, but it wasn't published till like 1532, 5 years after his death, right? So he was often called the father of modern political philosophy and political science. So, and
that's not a good thing.
No, and as you characterize them, this guy was like absolutely ruthless, cold-blooded, and giving all at the same time.
Yeah, it seemed like he was detached from it. It's not like I don't know if he was or wasn't a bad person, but it seems like he was like, oh, this is what I gotta do. So
he was so practical that you can't psychologically maybe refer to him as a sociopath. For him, it was just business. It's the way you conduct yourself, right? So it's not personal.
That doesn't sound crazy at all.
You think? But I'm surprised by how often I hear people cite, oh, it's not personal. Oh, you mean so fucking somebody over, it was a person, not because I hate you or you're a nice person, you're likable enough, but you were in my way. I had to do it. I had, Yeah,
now imagine someone walks up to you and like, hey man, I know that really hurt. It's it's just because I don't like you. It's very personal. It's not
then
business.
then that's the other side of the coin. So that somehow he's going, well, it's better if you do it my way, right? Because it's impersonal. Like, I don't really hate you. Like, but it's expedient and it serves me best if you're out of the way.
Yeah. So here's another kick.
Damn, man. For many years, he served as a senior official in the Florentine Republic with responsibilities in diplomatic and military affairs. So he was a militarist. So again, how often do you see in the course of just recent history how much influence militaries have within diplomatic affairs, and how much they're used to facilitate diplomacy with other nations, right? And everybody's posturing to try and get each other to back off of something, or to like let them know, hey, like if you want to go, we're good to go, right? And it's absolute it's absolute insanity, right? And here we are, and yet here we are, and it's that craziness has managed to prevent us thus far from getting into a nuclear war. I'm a child of the 80s, so I was born in the 60s, but I came into my own into adulthood in the 80s, and nuclear proliferation and the threat of nuclear war was ever present on our mind. I hardly hear anybody talk about it now, but back then, everybody thought about it. Right, and so we lived in the fear of a nuclear confrontation, and it's people conduct themselves now almost as though like that's not even like a consideration anymore. When the reality is, it's probably more likely now than it ever was in the 80s, because at least in the 80s it was between two power players, right? The former USSR and the USA. And they understood mutually assured destruction was not good for anybody, and I don't hear anybody talking like that now, right? So
yeah, it's terrible. It seems like people are more willing to go, listen, I'll let half my people die just to fuck over your people.
Can you imagine, right? But that's a total Machiavellian way to approach it, right?
Machiavelli would make some other country do it for them.
Oh. It's just it's compounded craziness, eh? It's just madness, like the stuff that you'd only imagine in fiction.
Yeah, sorry if this is showing my niche, but there's a bunch of like memes where it's a picture of the American flag poking a country, just going like, come on, fight, fight each other.
Imagine that, eh? After his death, Machiavelli's name came to evoke unscrupulous acts of the sort of advised most famously in his work The Prince. He claimed that his experience and his reading of history showed him that politics have always been played with deception, treachery, and crime. and
Not crime. No.
It's like he was prognosticating. Like he just predicted the 500 years after his passing exactly what's gone on. Our political histories, regardless of where you're from, they're not exclusively, but they're replete with deception, acts of treachery, ties to criminality, and then of course us passive civilians were like, it's just the way life is. It's all good. I'm too busy worrying about my job and making sure I get my fix.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just again, it's the kind of thing that really important, I think, to have an awareness of, and not only have an awareness of, but be able to talk about, and maybe even in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, because damn, isn't it ever grim, right? Like. He also notably said that a ruler who is establishing a kingdom or a republic and is criticized for his deeds, including violence, should be excused when the intention and the result are beneficial to him. Like, so this guy wanted to get out of jail free card, to be able to do to conduct himself politically in any means that he required without consequence,
Yeah.
right? And to this day, politicians behave like that all the time. They conduct themselves in whichever manner they choose to, with a disregard for consequence. Even when the consequences are hoisted on them, they do everything to deflect and
Yeah, no, that's one thing I find just it's not it makes no sense. Like I can understand it from their perspective, but it seems like a very like pardon my French, but very bitch way to go about it. Like oh, I'm sorry, I lied about collusion with another country, but don't arrest me. I just fucking did treacherous things because I wanted to win. It's like, oh, okay, we understand. We all
oh,
want to
I
win.
can appreciate that. Yeah, you're a game player. It's all just a game.
Yeah, there's a Geneva Code for a reason. We're like, hey, we can fuck each other over. Like, we all want to win. But you can't cross this boundary and do this to civilians.
Okay, so then the fair question here is then, if all this is going on, then is it ultimately to serve the purpose of being able to get the entirety of humanity under a single flag? Even though that in the way it would look like in reality is that would there'd be one dominant flag, so like the blue flag, say the United Nations, and all the other nations have their own independent flags, but they're all answerable to the one body. I'm just going to use the United Nations as an example. It's not necessarily them, but a single world government where now they dictate to all the other independent nations, whomever they think they are, and then so they're centrally controlled through a single sort of world political government, political forum. Sort of thing been in the news recently?
Can we take that a little bit further,
No.
actually? Because if you think about it,
no. Sure.
they want to rule completely.
All right, so then...
Through political means.
Okay.
And they want to be able to say, hey, I know I fucked everybody over, but I just wanted to win. So this is like some 13-year-old autistic kid with a fucking hammer that can kill anybody. And he's just sitting up there like, I just wanted to be your god. Why are you treating me like a bad guy? Well, you subjugated everybody.
Well, for 5,000 years, one of the primary things that we've done as a species is empire building.
Yeah, so I got too excited there.
It's okay. It's all good. It was good. So that in the course of that empire building, we've tried virtually every form of organization to dominate as many humans as in one single time, for the purposes of being able to have complete organization, and then that way you can. I guess the argument could be made that they were looking for the most efficient use of the membership and the population to further the ends of empire or nation building, because at the end of the day, you can split the hair however you want, but nations or empires, you can use those interchangeably. They're the same thing, right? Rome managed to pull it off. The Nazis almost managed to make it happen. The Soviet Union had its moment, but the biggest player and the one that's still here is the almighty USA. Now.
Did you all say USSR?
No, USSA. the America.
Yeah, America.
So, please don't take this the wrong way. I love Americans. I'm related to some, and I have a few that are friends. So, it's not a criticism. It's just an observation based on what we're talking about here, right? And ultimately, what we're talking about here is politics and leadership, and it's not just how it should function, but what purpose it serves ultimately, right? And now that what we're talking about is what it serves, and it's the ability to control and influence mass numbers of humans. And I'm just going to make this statement. I go because of our capacity for violence and our athletic abilities, we're kind of sometimes I skirt with this idea that maybe we're a warrior species, right? Like, not exclusively, like, because we have the capacity for commerce and art, but it just strikes me, and just in the last 5,000 years of recorded history, you don't have to go any further. You got, isn't that basically what we've been doing, right? That we've been really super efficient at being at cultivating combat capacities, and then applying that combat capacity against someone else's combat capacity, and then ultimately for conquest, right? So it makes me kind of like sit here and go, man, like, it's kind of dizzying when you start thinking about it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it might be in our nature to be assholes, but we choose to be good.
Right, and ultimately, then, if we're talking about balance, so if you have the capacity to be a bastard, or in this, you could interchangeably use the word warrior. We're not exclusively that. We have a range. We could go from destruction to healing to creativity to construction. So that's how we present, and I think we're better served when we find that balancing point.
Yeah, because it's culturally how you represent it. Because I said, what did I say? We're naturally assholes.
Yeah, something like that.
But the other side of that coin is like, okay, we have this capacity for really good, not really good, really great violence, like huge capacity of violence.
Right, but at the same time, to be very giving and supportive, and people do that, right? Like, people.
I was gonna say, like, the other side of that coin of being violent, we have a great capacity to defend what's worth defending. I know we're doing it through violence,
or to be compassionate, because you're still kind of, you're identifying two sides of the ability to be aggressive. And all I'm saying is that I make the argument all the time when I hear people say that, like, oh, it's our nature to be violent. That I go, it's just our capacity, and no matter how horrific that violence is, the opposite of that is a capacity for compassion, caring, and giving that's equal to the violence, right? So we really are this thing of extremes, right? And so I think we're all best served when part of your focus is to balance yourself, and the only way to find balance in yourself is to master yourself. So then all the capacities, or all the innate qualities that we have as human beings, that you as an individual, you take on the responsibility to find the balancing point between all of that, and then you become the master of your domain, and then maybe it leads then to high-end leadership, or qualities like that manifest in each and every person. Right, and again, with varying degrees, they're not going to all be equally. But the point is to work towards that, right? And what greater purpose or goal could there be? And then how would that inform then politics, right? So if you had a society of individuals who are striving for balance, striving for the highest expression of themselves, striving for self-mastery and self-transformation, where does it lead? Well, at least maybe to a better place than this shithole, right? Nah, it's okay. It's not all shithole.
There's some good stuff.
Yeah, there's good stuff. Yeah, there is. So this. So I would just want to. There's some comment. The last comment I want to make with regards to the worst of what we're capable of. The ultimate in subjectivity is selfish, self-interested worldview, which feeds into a lot of the worldview of the political class. Some consider it to be straightforward description of political reality. The main idea of the prince is a ruler that ends justify the means, right? That infamous for shifting the sense of virtue from moral worth to effectiveness. So ethics and morality take a back seat to being effective, because isn't that the reality of what he's trying to do? It's what's the most effective thing you can do. Someone in front of you, have opposition in front of you, you just simply get rid of them.
Yeah.
Problem solved. I'm like, but at the cost of what? Your integrity, your morality, any sense of ethics, like.
None of that works with business.
But then don't you reduce us then to dog eat dog world? Who can you trust in a climate like that? Nobody. I go, you want to live always looking over your shoulder? That's not living.
It's scary because that's how profits are made. Like, it's not to help your virtue. That sounds like you're trying to make your virtue seem better. But if someone's helping another person, it shouldn't have money attached. If there's a situation,
Or gain, rather.
right?
Right?
So companies aren't going to go, oh, this is the right thing to do. They're going to go, I can cut corners.
This is the most effective thing I can do, right? So it's then everything gets reduced to the efficiency of profit or whatever gains or benefits they perceive, right? Instead of because if we did things for the sake of efficiency, then you might not even need an ethical or a moral guideline. The ultimate expression of efficiency would be like here. Is this the most efficient thing you can do? Is eliminate others to create an environment of fear and paranoia and deception? That's not efficient. That just turns us on each other, right? So where's the efficiency in that? Unless, of course, your only objective is to govern everybody. So if nobody trusts anybody and we're all divided, then you're way easier to be manipulated and controlled, right? So it's again, enormously shitty, right? Machiavelli argued that the ruler should strive to maintain or expand their position, even if immoral acts are necessary to accomplish that goal, right? So, and he cites examples of the behaviors like theft, tangible or intangible, lying, deceit, sabotage, cheating, passive or active. Like to characterize him as a bastard or a fucking bastard is not a stretch. And the fact that he represents like foundationally speaking, like a cornerstone in modern politics. You go like it's like we're working. We're like Sisyphus, right? Like we're working. Like the odds are hugely stacked against us, right? And here and then we trust in the political class. We go, no, they're looking out for our best interest. Are you sure? Are you sure they are? I'm not so convinced anymore, right? Not for a long time. So
that's funny that a lot of people are cluing into that, considering that Machiavelli's way of doing this, it's worked. It's worked really
well, right? Yeah. But that's because, again, when you pull out all the stops and you have now the freedom to do whatever it is that you would choose to do, without fear of consequence and without consideration to anyone else but yourself. Fuck, man, that's a dangerous place to be. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be part of something like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's so many people out there that are realizing what their part of the system is, and they're going, wait a minute, where's my whistle? I gotta tell people. Like, I don't think Machiavellian rules apply to species like us. Like, it works. It really works. But at our core, we don't want to do this.
Well, but if you're a warrior culture, even though that we don't often see ourselves in that capacity, but you go like, think of all the combined militaries on the planet. That's a significant portion of the people living, right? Whose sole occupation is either defense or attack. You go, doesn't that constitute then a warrior culture, regardless of like how materialist driven and think about first person shooter games. Aren't they the most popular games on the planet? Everybody's armed to the teeth. And go, maybe we are a warrior species.
Yeah, and not like a violent species. Warrior species as in take no shit, cause no harm.
Yeah. I guess you could at least in terms of like the approach is
I'm talking ideally.
Yeah. Do no harm, take no shit, right? Like, um, that's something I've lived by most of my life, right? But then they go, isn't it another example of the fact that maybe as a species, that's what we are, and then so then this kind of political leadership and organization feeds into that, and now the modern version of the warrior is like, the high tech and you know ballistic weapons, and I'm like, I'm kind of tired of that stuff. I tend to gravitate more towards those, artful warriors or scholar warriors, people who are not purely just efficient in combat or warfare, or I like the idea that they can be much more. Like we illustrated with Miyamoto Musashi, who was a sword saint from Japan, right? Great, arguably the greatest samurai that ever lived. And when he died a man of peace, and he promoted peace. But he was the master duelist, like the master duelist. The next guy in line, his body count was half of what he did, right? So again, part of me just sit here and I shrug my shoulders, because I'm like, the more and more I talk about it, I just sit there and kind of a bit of disbelief, going that, wow, maybe that's what we really, really are, right? Like, thoughts, feelings.
You're saying like ready for conflict, not necessarily.
Yeah, and there's a difference between like that psychological imbalance thing, that individual who just likes to torture things or hurt things, right? Like they draw some kind.
Yeah.
We're not like that. We just have the capacity to do that. So when I refer to us as like a warrior species, I only mean that we have the capacity for that. But again, right?
Yeah.
The counterbalance to that is we're also the exact opposite, and in the most extreme capacity, like giving and loving and nurturing. Like we have this enormous range. So why wouldn't you find the place in between those two extremes, where now you can draw the best elements of both of those extremes without the nastiness?
I feel like the majority of people would be comfortable with a warrior culture if it's not like, hey, one group tells the fighting group to go kill a bunch of people. It's more like,
well, but isn't that politically what goes on? Like
politically, that's what's going on.
Yeah, politicians historically, what do? They send the young people of their country off to fight. World War One was a feud between all these inbred, interrelated, and intermarried royalty of Europe, and they basically had basically got reduced to an argument that turned into a fist fight that wiped out a generation.
Yeah, wasn't it one family that was predominantly fighting with?
Well, they at that time, all the royalty, because prior in the early 1900s or late 1800s, a lot of the European countries were still had royalty, kings and queens in charge of the nation.
Oh, genuine inbreds.
Well, but they were all interrelated. Here's the thing: they were all cousins. So what basically happened, it was a family feud.
Oh, I'd love to see that episode of Family Feud.
So that's basically what that was, and so again, it's just here we are. We're confronted with these things, and the real question is, for the people right here, right now, is this really how you want our societies run, and are you really comfortable with living within all of this? If the answer is yes, then the answer is yes, and you're good. But I can't for the life of me imagine that. I can't for the life of me imagine that anybody would be really okay with this. This is just like, to call it sad is kind of that understates it, right? So, getting on with Machiavelli and his influence. So, empiricism and realism versus idealism. And Machiavelli is often seen as the prototype of a modern empirical scientist, building generalizations from experience and historical facts, and emphasizing the uselessness of theorizing with the imagination. Right? So this is a guy who is like complete reductionist, material reductionist. It's just about the facts. Hey, and domination, right? Like, god damn, he was a supervillain before there were supervillains.
Honestly, when I read The Prince, it sounded not dry as in like boring, but he seemed so just disconnected with the content he was bringing up.
So maybe he was a psychopath. Maybe he was a sociopath, right? Like,
I could see it. Reading that book, I could see it.
And he was just able to and so he was able to function. So he was a high functioning psychopath or sociopath because he could work within the context of that time period that he lived in. Right? So Machiavelli repeatedly saw religion as man-made, and that the value of religion lies in its contribution to social order and the rules of morality, which must be dispensed with if security requires it. The Prince and his other discourses in his life, he describes he calls them like Moses, Romulus, Cyrus the Great, and Theseus as prophets, treated pagan and Christian patriarchs in the same way. So as long as it served to basically be a lever to move people to do things or not to do things, that's all he saw religion as. Like, it did beyond its practical function. Didn't give a shit about the spiritual component, if he even thought of that as a consideration, right? Machiavelli's realism and willingness to argue that good ends justify bad things is seen as a critical stimulus of most of the important theories of modern politics. Right, and so we know this to be true. Like, you can, if you take just a surface dive into modern day politics, you'll see that, like, here, this is ongoing. It's always been ongoing, right? Unethical and amoral critics argue that Machiavelli's advice promotes unethical behavior, amoral politics. His emphasis on deception, manipulation, and the use of force for political gains is morally questionable and contrary to the principles of virtue and ethical leadership. So that much is true. But if we're going to make a philosophical argument, that statement rings true. But the reality is that that the politics and the political class function more closely to what he envisioned than not. All right. So, and again, not to say that they don't do anything good, but remember, these guys will weigh their benefit against the benefits of the membership. So they'll posture, they'll do anything to virtue signal to make them seem as though that somehow they're one of us, that they care and stuff. And I go, how could they possibly relate if they've never had to work 9 to 5? They never had to struggle to put food on the table, especially in the economic climate we live in now. And yet somehow they they try to present themselves as being relatable, that they can relate to us. They can't at all. They'd have no idea what it's like to be the average person. And wouldn't that be great if they did? Right? If they had, before you could get into politics, you had to spend an entire year working a minimum wage job and surviving on minimum wage.
I feel like they would kill all of us if they did that. They'd be like, wait, this is what it's like?
Yeah, so it's just, again, it's this weird super stuff that you go, like, sometimes when in researching this stuff, I sit there and I go, come on, how is it that it is possible? And I'll explain how it's possible for something like that to arise. Machiavelli was born in a tumultuous era, probably no different than this one, right? The Italian city-states and the families and the individuals who ran them could rise and fall suddenly as popes and kings of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire waged acquisitional wars for regional influence and control and dominance, right? And political military alliances continually changed, featuring, so like you said, where you can't even trust your own personal guards, right? Like, you got like, it's just madness. It's just incredibly insane. And then it makes you wonder, are we paralleling the 1500s, like his experience? Now, we're gonna, it was an influence in Machiavelli, but we're gonna cite another example of abuse of authority, and I think you're gonna find it, like, again, that there's no institutions where this does not happen, and it'll demonstrate it very clearly. So in 1502 or 1503, Machiavelli, he witnessed the brutal reality of the state's building methods of Caesar Borgia. So he existed from 1475 and 1507, and his father, Pope Alexander VI. So, who were then engaged in the process of trying to bring a large part of central Italy under their possession. The pretext of defending church interests was used as a partial justification by the Borgias. So the Borgias, the family, they were originally from Spain and descendants of a noble line, originally from Valencia, Spain. They established roots in Italy and became prominent ecclesiastical, relating to like the Christian church and its clergy, and political affairs in the 1400s to the 1500s. The House of Borgia produced 2 popes and many other political and church leaders. The Pope himself, Alexander VI, was formerly known as Rodrigo Borgia, and it is said that his daughter Lucretia and son Serse were implicit in the spectacle. There's some wild speculations that they basically had incestuous relationships with the daughter and produced offspring. A 3-year-old boy named Giovanni, whom Lucretius appeared in 1501, recognized the child as the illegitimate son of Caesar, then Alexander, who was probably the true father. So, but again, there's no proof or evidence of it. The Borgias completely abused the authority, and they had the backing of the church because one of them was the Pope. And Caesar was a criminal of the worst kind. Political wrangling, political killings, organized criminality, and it was all for the pursuit of wealth, independent wealth, and power, right? So, and these are the people that Niccolo Machiavelli it has not just a casual awareness of, probably a more candid kind of awareness of the goings on. And if you do I'm not going to get into all the details of how abusive they were, but they were so fucking disturbed. And I'm not picking on Christianity. Every institution has produced abusers of their authority and their position who acted as though there was no consequence to what they did, and again, to the service of their own self-interest. So I'm not picking on any one religion. They're all guilty of it, right? So
is this where the term bourgeoisie?
No. That's a French term that relates to the French Revolution.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, but the Borgia, there was, I think about 15 years ago, there was a popular TV miniseries about them, and like I said, if you do even a casual dive into the Borgia, your jaw will hit the freaking floor. You'll sit there and go, "Come on, man! They literally got away with endless murder and just."
Back then, the church had a lot of power.
Well, it had absolute power, right? Because the church and state were still the same thing. There was no division. That didn't happen for a couple hundred years.
I meant more with
after that.
I meant like they could justify it however they want because the religious aspect, not just power, but the perception of it.
right, that they could make a faith-based argument that, like, here I'm supposed to be doing this, but you go, come on, like these guys were they're entertaining prostitutes, ladies of the night, not to take anything away from sex workers. Love you, you human beings. Yeah, but they did every thing that a polite society would consider indecent. They did, and they repeat not just once, repeatedly. Man, they were like it was just like I said. If you were to take a dive into it, like if you find a documentary on them, just do a YouTube search, Borgia documentary. Honestly, by the end of it, you'll sit there and shake your head in disbelief. You go like, these people were fucking nuts, man. Right? So, okay. So again, since the theme is Machiavelli's approach to politics, and the general topic being politics itself, there's also an awareness of false flags. So I'm only going to comment. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I'm only commenting on one in particular that's to illustrate the point that how that you can virtually set up circumstances and promote them in such a way then to facilitate a political end goal. Right. So the one in particular that I'd like to comment on is the operation. Okay, so a false flag is defined as an operation where an act committed with the intent of disguising the actual source of responsibility and pinning blame on another party. Hence the term false flag, originated in the 16th century as an expression meaning an intentional misrepresentation of someone's allegiance. Straw man. 10 logical fallacies. The term was used to describe a ruse in naval warfare whereby a vessel flew the flag of a neutral country or an enemy country in order to hide its true identity, right? So I'm going to cite now an historical example of that's, guess what? It's not conspiracy theory. This is mainstream history, and it's commonly understood to be true. The incident was called the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. It was an international confrontation that led the United States engaging more directly in the Vietnam War. A confrontation on August 2nd, 1964, when the United States forces were carrying out covert operations close to North Vietnamese territorial waters, and North Vietnamese forces responded. The United States government falsely claimed that the second incident occurred on the 4th of August 1964 between North Vietnam and the United States vessels in the waters in the Gulf of Tonkin. Originally, the U.S. military claims blamed North Korea for the confrontation, but in fact, it was all imaginary. Later investigations revealed that the second attack never happened. They explained it away by saying the official American claim is that it was based mostly on erroneous interpreted communication intercepts. Right? So again, they dismissed to explain away what they did. And then they used the incident to further justify their role in the Vietnam War. So they supported South Vietnam, and at that time, the Soviet Socialistic Republic, the USSR, supported Northern Vietnam, right? And the argument that at that time, because remember this is the 60s, it was to prevent the proliferation of communism, and they refer to it as the domino effect. If they allowed for nations to become communist, then it would threaten to overtake the whole world, right? So that was their ultimate justification. Again, lies compounded by further lies, and then commit their young people to a horrible experience of open warfare. Welcome to the real world, right? So. Again, having said that, it demonstrates clearly how Machiavelli's approach underlies a lot of what's been going on since that time, right? So then here's the question: how much of that do you think is going on today.
I can think of one thing that might be a red flag operation.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to. Again, I don't want to get into the game of like trying to cite that stuff. I'm more interested in the fact that in terms of like the way they conduct themselves, that this example illustrates the fact that hey, this goes on,
Yeah.
right? And it's been ongoing since Machiavelli's time, right?
I was thinking it's interesting. It's called a red flag operation. In this example, boats would fly certain flags to say they're neutral or part of a neutral country, this or that. It kind of reminds me, like, if you think in a Machiavellian way, any rules that are there, they're just to be broken by the more Machiavellian character.
Right,
It's
right.
like, who's gonna follow the rules? Not that guy.
Not any of them.
None of the winners are gonna follow the rule. Like,
Right, so again, it makes for super. It's kind of the kind of thing where you sit there, and again, it makes me often wonder how much of this is being applied today. And the reality of it is that it's probably quite a bit. It's probably at work and at play more often than one would imagine, right? Because the perception and our interpretation of the world is that they tried to sell us that it's this reasonably good place. There's some wholesome elements to it, but in light of everything that's gone on like the last 5 years, you just see that it's just compounded division, right? It's just further divided us, and now there's no sense of real unity. The shame, the casualty to this entire Machiavellian approach is any real sense of strength in brotherhood, or however you would choose to characterize it, in unity.
I was just gonna add, it's not just Machiavellian type.
Players who are
Yeah, it's not just his methods or the players like him. Well, actually, players like him are getting even more sophisticated, in my opinion. Because even in the 1950s, we started looking into like psychology and social psychology, like different ways, I guess, to understand people and like the fluidity of people. And they started building a science around like, okay, well, we can interpret certain things about personal behavioral psychology and group psychology. Like the idea that Machiavellian characters are just what we've been describing. There's so much. There's so much out there that they could use to their benefit. Like 1950s psychologists, reading that has kind of made me think like, oh, there's a lot of ways I could see people are using these. I'm going to say methodologies to their benefit.
Well, I think what you might find interesting as a final commentary on what you said, like that in terms of psychology. Think about the episode that we did on MK Ultra.
That was so disturbing.
Oh yeah, but MK Ultra in and of itself wouldn't that represent the ultimate Machiavellian move? You create players, like it's literally you create players that are chess pieces on the board that you can essentially get to do whatever it is that you require of them, right?
Yeah, the idea of a sleeper agent is terrifying, especially when they can't recall it themselves.
Right. Again, makes you just sit there and shake your head in disbelief. You go like, it's like it's truly is science fiction. Okay, so I think so that kind of ties up the idea of like Machiavelli and how he was influenced by his time, and the idea that essentially anything goes, and really what that and if it'd be fair to say it's just abuse of a power and authority for the purposes of expanding your power and authority. So just again, just they write comic books about supervillains like that, right? So anyway, so what could potentially be seen as maybe a counterbalance to that? If all this is true, everything that we just cited in the course of discussing leadership and politics and Machiavelli, what could potentially politically could you do then to offer that would be like a complete counterbalance that could maybe even overturn the cart?
I have no idea what the method would look like, but I believe through the understanding of what's going on currently and historically, you can really start to see like, hey, it's a little easier to see when people are messing with your perception of them. Like these Machiavellian characters, once you know their tricks, they're like, the Batmobile's outside.
Yeah, they're a one-trick pony. I get it.
And then nobody's gonna go, okay, there's no Batmobile outside, and if there was, we're dragging you to it because we're done.
Okay, so then I would offer up this. So for any people with political aspirations and pundits who are idealists who believe in a moralistic kind of political approach and where the virtue is more beneficial than effectiveness, I would offer up this, that maybe that your political platform could be complete transparency, because it's something not seen in politics, where so what you do in the transparency promotes accountability and provides information for citizens about what their government is doing in politics. Transparency is used as a means of holding public officials accountable and fighting corruption. So since what was the name? Edward Snowden. So we realize now that they've accumulated tons of data, and now AI is becoming so sophisticated that it's able to, now they have the ability to actually filter through all that data, right? Whereas, but when they were collecting it initially, they could collect it, but the kind of man hours required to pour through all that data would made it impractical. But now AI can allow for the facilitation of that. So my point being that you can't hide nothing anymore. So then I'm like, well, okay, I won't hide anything, right? Take a deep look as you want. But here's the rub. So for those of you aspiring to politics, then what you do is that your political platform is then that you, whoever's supporting your campaign, whoever you're tied to, in and out of politics, you out everybody. You out yourself right from the get-go. So that kind of political transparency then, what would that do? It would encourage us to trust you, because I can only speak for myself right now, but I don't trust any politician. Never did, never will. And that includes lawyers, because who makes up the majority of the political class? Lawyers. So fuck you. So I don't like them, right? And I'm not apologizing for that. I have the right to express that as an idea. And the reason why I don't is because they to this day largely manifest that entire approach that Niccolo Machiavelli promoted, right? So here I would offer this up, that maybe then the new face of politics, because there's no way of undoing the world as it is. And since they can see everything that I'm doing, here, you want my trust, you want me to be a willing participant, show us everything you're doing. Don't hide shit from us no more.
Yeah, like the one president had a slogan, hope. It's like, hope is a fucking thin sheet.
Yeah, man,
like,
that doesn't keep.
You want me to have faith?
Yeah, that's not going to keep me warm at night.
Yeah.
You know what's going to keep me warm at night? A blanket of truth, a transparency, where they clearly demonstrate and they show here. Yeah. This is who I'm entangled with. This is who I'm in bed with. I go, you know what? I would go to my way to vote for somebody who would be willing to do that. But in the political philosophy of Niccolo Machiavelli, somebody like that would probably have an untimely death.
Yeah.
But what if you didn't have one, but you had hundreds of them? I'm going, might be a game changer. Right? I go, so they already have access to everything I am. So you're invited into my home. Come on in. I don't care. Suck a dick. Fuck you. Right? But if you want access to all that, to all my private stuff, then you owe us the same in return. And if you have the courage to actually do that, then guess what? It might make for a more civil place. Suddenly we'll become more relaxed and go like, you know what? I'm okay with this, because at least you have the audacity and the integrity to come clean.
Yeah, there's no political figures that at least act like they're trying to benefit their neighbor.
No,
Like they're just like, oh yeah, the neighbor of my island, with their mega yacht. It's never about the person beside them.
Right. So they're all only ever selling platitudes, and they're selling something. And I'm going, stop selling something.
Yeah.
Here.
Hope.
Yeah. I don't want your hope. You know what I want? Be honest with us. Be transparent. Here, show us where you made mistakes. Because guess what? I can guarantee you, every one of us is flawed and made errors. So I'll be really understanding if you come clean about your shit.
Transparency seems to be working currently with whistleblowers about this and that. Because
it needs to be. All I'm arguing is that for it to be more widespread within politics and the political class. Right? So those of you who, I can't imagine anybody in politics watching this, but those few, if any, who might be, there's your political platform. Transparency, right? Be honest with us. Stop lying to us. Stop trying to fucking work the situation to your advantage. Just become completely clean. You might be surprised, one, how understanding we are, and then two, how it opens the door for us to really problem solve. Unless, of course, you don't want to problem solve. In which case, did I just paint a target on myself?
Transparency seems to be the way to go, and there's no argument against transparency. They're not going to say, oh, we don't think you can deal with knowing about this. It's like, excuse me, you're a human being. You're made of the same shit I am. You're not you're not some cosmological being that can hold the truth in your brain without it exploding. It's like, whatever's out there, if there's a president, if there's any human being that's been dealing with it, transparency is going to be like the one way that you can unburden yourself.
Right.
You don't have to be Machiavellian.
Right.
You can be shitty at your job. Just be truthful about how shitty you are.
So then suddenly that's the kind of thing that was. I think one time you said, often when I'm losing, I'll flip the game board over. Well, this would be the equivalent of turning over the apple cart.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that
you're gonna flip the board and say you won, but you're still gonna flip the board.
So I would say then maybe it's that kind of transparency, and maybe it starts with us, the individuals. So we just stop selling each other horse shit and lies and crap. That we're upfront with each other. You don't color things anymore to try and like win favors and stuff. You go, here, no, we're better served if we walk through life just being honest with one another. To me, every time I hear myself say something like talk about being transparent and open and honest, I get excited. I really do. I genuinely do. To me, I go, could it be that simple a solution? The answer may be yes. Right? I would absolutely love to see this become a trend in politics. I would dance a jig on the street and record it for public consumption.
That'd be hilarious. Just politicians going, do you know what's going on? Not really. Do you? Oh, shit, dude, I got paid to be here.
So, transparency in business and governance, it refers to being open and honest, and an open government is transparent, accessible to anyone, anytime, anywhere, and responsive to new ideas and demands. I go, in light of everything that's happened and has happened in the last couple of years, wouldn't that be just something incredibly refreshing to have to suddenly have a government that's sensitive to everyone? Now, how realistic that is, we're going to struggle with it. I'm not talking about, I'm not an idealist. I'm just talking about doing things differently. Will suddenly all our problems go away? No. But it might be the beginning of us being able to dismantle a lot of stuff that you would consider unscrupulous, right? Like that, that we don't have to worry about that anymore because everybody's coming clean. They don't have to be outed by somebody. They're going, no, I'm, this is what I've been doing. I know it makes me a shitty person, and I'm genuinely sorry about that. I would accept an apology like that. If they came completely clean, they just completely outed themselves. No, none of them have the courage to do that. That requires like real brass pair of balls or a cast iron vagina, which none of them have. Right? So again, which would be fantastic if the political class could represent and present in that way, but they're gonna do what they're gonna do, right? So I think it's an important principle in terms of, or an idea for decent and good governance, and possibly, hopefully, one day in the not too distant future, we'll see this as a trend among the political class. It would be just eye-opening at the very least, right? So having said that, so I'm going to close that out on transparency, and I just want to move on to democracy, and I don't want to dive into it too deeply. I just want to comment on the different forms of democracy. So, and in terms of what might represent greater transparency, right? Because the current form of democracy is representative democracy, right? That we currently live within it, particularly if you live in Canada and the United States. But it's not exclusive to us. There's many countries in the world that that's part of their political ideologies, right? So the representative democracy is only as good as its representatives. So I don't know what more needs to be said other than that. And we know we see them; they're questionable at best, right? Like I'm sorry, but
we have democracy, but you don't know if they're transparent about what's actually going on.
What
their actual methods are.
And because we know their philosophical foundation is in Niccolo Machiavelli's philosophy, then you can't believe them. Why? That's like putting your head in a crocodile's mouth and not expecting it to close its mouth. It's insane, right? So anyway, so having said that, our representative democracy is only as good as the representatives. And think about the representatives that you are currently having to deal with, right? And check out legacy media and see how they're conducting themselves, and see what people who are in opposition to them, what they're saying, and suddenly you'll realize that you're being they're trying to baffle everybody with bullshit, or worse, just to be dismissive. So this is what the outcome now of representative democracy is. It's just them trying to wheel and deal with us and confuse and bamboozle us. So I mean, you decide if that statement's accurate or inaccurate. But come on, like, do you get the sense that they genuinely give a shit, or that they're covering their own asses?
I feel like it's virtue signaling.
Try that again?
Yeah. Virtue signaling, and they're also trying to represent themselves as part of a group.
Right,
the problem is, like, they want the most people to vote for them, so they're gonna try to apply to multiple niche groups. And it's like, it is really muddy.
Oh, totally messy. Completely muddy. So now, having said that, there are other forms of democracy, right? Or another form of democracy, which is called direct democracy or pure democracy. A form of democracy in which the electorate decides on policy initiatives without elected representatives as proxies. This differs from the majority of the current established democracies in the world, which are representative, right? The theory and practice of direct democracy and participation as its common characteristic was at the core of the work of many theorists, philosophers, politicians, and social critics. So it's not a new idea, right? It's an idea that's been around a long time. But those who like power, they don't want to give it up, right? So I can imagine where they would frown heavily on direct democracy or pure democracy. Its only shortcoming is that it's based on the lowest common denominator in a society built around the cornerstone idea of elevating its general membership to its highest degree. So if the general membership of a pure democracy is less than average, or average, then how thoughtful are they going to be in their voting? Are they actually going to be considerate and mindful? That becomes the question. Like, because it's to a degree it's mob rules, right? So it's all based on the idea that people can govern themselves. And I like the idea of small government. I like the idea of people having autonomy and being able to conduct themselves in a manner that befits them, so long as it's not at the expense of anybody else. So, it's, and some of the limitations often cited in direct democracy, it only works when you have small countries and small numbers, a small population serving the country. But I offer you this: between AI and the advancing in computer technology, where maybe you can make a voting system where it's completely hack proof, right? And again, I don't know enough to know about computers to know, but I know that there are very other forms of computer and computer models that are nothing like the ones that are widespread in our society, that you couldn't hack. Like, they're designed such a way that you can't, there's no way to go in and reprogram them. And that because everybody carries around a mobile device, that you could essentially experience direct democracy and everybody could do it from their device. And if you're in a world where it's completely transparent and you have direct democracy, it doesn't matter, because nobody gives a shit about your personal shit, because everybody's personal shit is out. So then you could essentially have simply referendums on every issue that might affect the nation, the planet, the people. And then what you do is you have a referendum, and then leading up to the referendum, you would provide data inputs for potential outcomes if you choose to go vote one way or you choose to vote the other way. So then you lay it out here. This is our best thinking. This is what we think could or could not happen. Now it's up to you guys to decide which way you'd like to go. Right? So countries couldn't go to war anymore unless the majority of the population supported it. They couldn't make decisions. The political class, who are typically in bed with the financial class and the financial institutions of the world, they suddenly couldn't dictate policy. Policy would be set by the general membership. So I think it's something that maybe time has come, and our technology would allow for it. So anyone who would argue against it, I think that their only reason that they would do that is because they don't like the idea of it, because they themselves may lose any kind of potential gains, benefits, or their power or authority, or even financial wealth. That is a direct result of the way things are currently done. So direct democracy, in conjunction with transparency, could change the game, man. So for those of you who question whether or not it could actually work, let me just offer you this, okay? The earliest documented direct democracy that we're aware of, and again, it's arguable, is the Athenian democracy of the 5th century before the Common Era. The main bodies in Athens democracy were the assembly, composed of male citizens, composed of 500 citizens, and the law courts, composed of a massive number of jurors chosen by lot but with no judges. So the jurors would plead the case, and then the 500-man assembly would cast ballots, and then that's how it would be run. So that's the earliest awareness that we have of it. In modern era, citizen lawmaking occurs in Switzerland, right? So it's not without a contemporary example of it. From the 13th century, it's been around. In 1847, the Swiss added the statute referendum for their national constitution. They soon discovered that merely having the power to veto Parliament's laws was not enough. In 1891, they added the Constitutional Amendment Initiative. Swiss politics, since 1891, have given the world a valuable experience base with national-level constitutional amendment initiatives. So a form of direct democracy. And so now it's not just an idea, it's something that's actually currently being employed by a nation. So it gives us the benefit, and they've been doing it since 1890. So that's at least 130 years. So that's a lot of experience to draw from in terms of how to maybe go about doing this. So I would offer that to all the naysayers. That anyone going, yeah, it's not practical. Well, they're doing it, so there must be some practicality to it, right? So maybe it's you. Maybe you're the one who's practically stupid, right? Because it's certainly not them. They're the ones who are actually practicing it. So, but it requires an open mind. It requires us to think in ways that we don't, right? Look, I think it was, I'm going to misquote, it was probably Einstein who said, but the kind of thinking that will solve your problem isn't the same kind of thinking that created the problem. So you have to look at the way that you're thinking and then ask yourself, is this the best way that we can be doing it? Is there another way? But nobody asks those questions, right? Because you're so self-absorbed, so caught up in your lives and living your lives, your favorite musician, celebrity, whomever, whatever, that you never stop to think that is there potentially a better way of doing this? You ever think about that?
Yeah, for all sorts of industries. But I was thinking, it's my first instinct is like, oh, it's a little dangerous just having a group of people voting on something, but at least there, it's ultimate transparency.
Well, and so then what if then politicians were just administrators? And like I said, and then you get experts to present two sides, or even three sides of a particular, whatever the particular issue might be, the political issue at hand. And then you offer up you make it easily understandable, the outcomes of all the different political positions, and you make it accessible to everybody, and you give them adequate time for them to discuss it amongst themselves. And then you place it to a vote. Is the process going to be slower? Maybe, but
definitely.
But then maybe that's for the best. And again, I would argue that technology has now allowed for maybe direct democracy to be global.
It would be better that, in my opinion, it would be better that it's slower, because the rate of change in technology, we can't exactly have guidelines for not just the technology, but the way we view it and ourselves. Like, a lot of people are concerned about AI just running wild. Personally, that's the camp I would usually go into, but there's so many benefits to AI.
We're gonna have an episode where we cover AI, but not today. But you can see where it would be an absolute benefit and enhancement that would allow for something like direct democracy to occur. And remember, so it's a combination of the technology, open transparency by everybody concerned, and then and then direct democracy itself. right? That somehow that it could be a more effective way to run a planet.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's very tough to have a group of people agree on things, but if you have at least the broad, let's say 500 people, 450 agree on one method, and then between the last 50, it's like, this group and that group. At least once you have the decision of which option to take, you can also talk about, okay, what's the method for like measuring if we're on the right pace? Is it just for the efficiency of this one goal, or is it a two-part goal? That way we know we're not doing at a deficit of something that seems to us like it might be a deficit.
Right.
Like we're going to take away guns from the public, but at the same time, that's to protect them. If they have no guns, they can't protect themselves. It also stops somebody who would have a gun to shoot other people. It would prevent them from causing harm. So let's take everybody's guns and just see.
Yeah, I'm not in support of that.
I wouldn't support it either. I'm just saying, let's look at, is crime rates going up or is it going down? And then how are we getting those crime rates? Is it strictly gun violence, or is there a rise in knife violence
okay,
now?
right. So
like there's multiple issues.
Okay, so that kind of thing again. It's socio-economic. You can tie it directly to. I mean, it's well understood now that poverty contributes to crime. So the more impoverished you are, you can expect there to be greater an increase in crime and greater forms of crime.
Oh, that has to do with like within your local community. If everybody's poor there, there's no real issues. You're not stealing shit from nobody.
No, but then they go outside the community.
Yeah, that's where the
okay. All right. So the argument that I make is that maybe a way to indirectly address those kind of issues you could resolve with a form of direct democracy, transparency, and the support of technology to be able to facilitate all that. That it might be the beginnings of the way to address that. I'm not talking about it producing like a perfect solution. I don't think there is such a thing. I think, however, it'll give us the ability to be more honest in dealing with stuff, so that instead of ignoring, essential information like the fact that crime and poverty, there's a direct relationship there. You want to neutralize crime, neutralize poverty, right? And so if you made that a political position, and then you had everybody vote, go, okay, we're going to support every impoverished family out there. Again, I'm not talking about socialism. I'm just going, here, we're going to look after our own shit. You might see a steep curve in crime because suddenly there's no need for it. Then I hear the argument all the time, well, if you give everybody, they'll just sit around and do nothing. No, then you provide the opportunity for expansion of self, right? Remember, the whole foundation of my personal philosophy is mastery of self. So it becomes the purpose, the thing that drives you through your life, right? The struggle to unify mind, body, and spirit. That's the way. This is the way. Not the shit that we do now, right? What more proof do you need other than the current state of affairs? Right? So clearly it's this thing that's limping along, all for the benefit of the privileged, so they can feel more privileged. Well, you're not addressing any of the real concerns of society, of civilization as a whole. We could all be leaders, philosopher, kings, poet, scholar, warriors, and instead you want to be like flipping burgers at McDonald's. Like, come on. Don't act like that's even the real choice. It's not a choice. Right? So that's my deal. Hey, get a time check, brother.
It's 3:16 right now. We're an hour and 53 minutes in.
I think that this might be a good time to call it quits. Anything you'd like to say in closing? Anything you feel like you'd like to contribute?
I love the idea of transparency, because at this point, it's people are either going to get outed or they're going to have to come forward.
Well, I just think that that instead of waiting for them to do it, to try and get those who are entering into the political forum, for them to maybe start thinking that this might be the methodology by which we pursue politics.
Yeah, imagine somebody goes up this stage, they're like, "Hi, my name's Jim Clark." Instead of pronouns, they'll be saying, "I'm from Exxon and fucking Global Gas," you know.
Yeah, and
It's some transparent, some.
Yeah, you know, and I don't buy my weed from legal stores. I buy it from my friend Jose, who lives down the street because he grows his own shit.
Yeah.
That kind of
Support your gardens.
Yeah, that kind of transparency, which suddenly would make them, one, everything that they fake try to do would suddenly make them instantly relatable. You go like, hey, wow, they're not any different than we are. Instead of this phony Maloney bullshit that we have to endure with these basically like political pundits who rely on charisma.
I thought you were gonna say pop stars.
No, well, but aren't they pop stars? Yeah. Aren't they? Right? Like, so it's all just, like I said, it's all a joke. So instead of it being a joke, we have the potential and the possibility to, you know, elevate not just ourselves, but our entire nation, civilization, and planet to. That's where we stand on. We stand at the precipice of realizing all of our potentials, or we fall back into economic feudalism, and those who have the right to rule are those who have own all the finance, or have all the finances and own anything that's worth owning. I go, come on.
Well, that's kind of terrifying when you think of like techocracies.
Well, but that's where we are, and I'm like, I go, here. We need to, instead of just you and I having this conversation, we need to be at least talking amongst ourselves about this sort of thing. But again, so often, so many of us don't care, more concerned with having their edibles and going out partying or whatever. Like, I'm like, you know, there's a time and place for that, but there's a time and place for this too. And you're out of balance if you're not thinking about these things and not talking about these things and not trying to, as an individual, try to have a better sense of where you are and the world you live in, right? And that's what we actively promote here, right?
Motivation instead of satiation. Satiation.
Satiation.
Instead of eating, you know, get motivated.
Yeah, be motivated, 100%. So just in closing, I think I'd like to say, or I'm going to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Thank you. Have a good night.